going to be talking with Arup at the end, and they're going to have a half hour to themselves at the end. So we've got 3 speakers before that. Welcome to Lambeth Food Stories 2021, the state of our food, this Tuesday, the 2nd of March. Actually, if you're, could you all mute your phones? Okay, thank you. We started these food stories online almost a year ago. In the first food story, we invited people who had responded to the immediate crisis by providing food for others. We heard from 5 incredible women who, one way or another, were cooking or supporting those people who found themselves in a very precarious place as a direct result of the pandemic. Today is a chance to recap on this very strange year, never imagining we would still be under lockdown a year later, never imagining the eye-watering amount of national debt and the enormous number of personal crises that people in Lambeth and the whole country are dealing with. We want to consider what it has shown us about our current food system, to reflect on any weaknesses of that system, to highlight where those weaknesses are manifesting themselves, and to consider how food growing fits into the puzzle of how we as food growers can shape a better food system for everyone. To help us unpack this story at national level, we've invited Pam Warhurst. I don't think Pam's here yet, so I'll introduce Pam when she arrives, but we'll move straight on to Kate Hogarth. More locally, we've asked Kate to report on Lambeth's food poverty and insecurity action plan, which is 2021 to 24, a plan which has just been out for consultation. She has kindly agreed to step in for our colleagues Bimpy and Vida, who are unable to be with us. Kate's role at the council is as programme leader on climate change and sustainability. We have had many conversations with her about how our work intersects with the climate change issues. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks very much, Marjorie. I'd also like to just introduce my colleague, Matt. Are you around? Can't see you on the screen. Yeah, Matt.
Yeah.
So Matthew Fanu is the Climate Change Adaptation and Flood Risk Manager at Lambeth Council. And so we work together quite closely on anything that relates to climate change adaptation. And we're currently kind of in the initial scoping phases of thinking about what a climate change adaptation plan and strategy needs to look like for Lambeth. So I think it would make sense actually for Matt to start and give you a bit of an overview of that adaptation kind of work stream and how it fits into our climate change program. And then I'll pick up after that and just give you a quick overview of the Lambeth food poverty and insecurity plan after my colleague. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Kate. I'll just give this a go. This won't be death by PowerPoint, I promise. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, so as Kate was saying, I'm Matthew Panu. I'm the Flood Risk and Climate Adaptation Manager. So my role within Lambeth is big as part of the wider climate change work that the council's currently doing. And we've separated that out into different work streams. Mine being the one circled in red, which is adaptation and resilience. But there are other ones that we're currently working on as part of our climate change response. That one's the one I'm focused on. So I'll leave that up there just for people to take that in. But effectively, the area that I'm working in is primarily focused on flood risk and heat risk, but also biodiversity and trying to create co-benefits with the work that we're doing, and food growth is one of those elements of adaptation that we would like to support. Just to give you an overview of what climate change and adaptation looks like nationally, actually, as well as within Lambeth. These are what the climate risks that have been identified by national government. And the top 2 are the most, the highest risk sources sources of risk, and that being flooding and also high temperatures. So these are our primary focus in the work that we're doing. I've circled the one in green because that is currently a statutory requirement of Lambeth Council. The one dotted around in red, whilst there are requirements of a council to combat the pressures that heat risk poses on us, it's not necessarily something that is required of us on a proactive approach. It's more of a reactive approach to things like or can't remember the department, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. I might come back to me in a second. Then I've circled the area in purple, and that just being that this is the area that this forum is mostly interested in, and that is soil biodiversity and food production. And what's important to know is actually the work that we do in the top two can actually support those elsewhere in those risks that are posed by climate change, and the work that we can do to adapt to that. So here is some of our scopes and key outcomes, and flood risk and heat risk being our highest priority. But then the co-benefits, and that's going back to this diagram. So what we do with the top two, we can actually help with the rest of them. And so this is what we're trying to achieve, and we don't want to silo. So whilst at the moment these are siloed, all the work that we want to do, any scheme that we undertake, we want to try and combat each of those factors that would be affected by climate change, and try to adapt to them. So within food security, that we consider that as a co-benefit. So the measures that we implement can support food security and food growth, and things also like soil conservation. I don't want to read, I won't read through that. Some of our quick wins and some of our important factors with looking at climate adaptation and climate change is understanding your baseline, and that's what we're currently doing. So at the moment we're trying to identify those areas that are most at risk of flooding, and the what we can do to mitigate that risk, and that applies to heat risk as well. And our co-benefits, that's just working within the organisation and outside the organisation to see where we are undertaking schemes, what else can we do with that? And a good example of that would be cycle provision. Can we provide something like a bike hanger where we're undertaking a scheme? Or even if we're depaving, is that a location that would be ideal for food growth? And just to finish off with some maps, because I really like pictures. On the left is some early work on what our climate vulnerabilities look like. And this includes physical factors such as heat risk, and also human factors like multiple indices of deprivation. And here is a layer of all those factors, and red being those places that are most at risk from climate vulnerabilities.
I can't hear anything.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. And then on the right is our latest outputs from some flood risk baseline, and it's about trying to layer these, trying to identify those places that are most vulnerable, and then from there we can understand where we can implement measures to make the biggest impact. That's all. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Matt. So
great. So, I mean, that sets the scene really for, you know, how we imagine our climate change work. So, as Matt was saying, there's sort of key areas where we locally, as a council, have the most kind of control or resources available, or ability to make an impact, seem to be around, you know, prioritizing flood risk, heat risk, and then green infrastructure and access to green space is a really key way of sort of mitigating and managing those risks. And along with that comes the opportunity for addressing those much wider systemic risks from climate change, things around food poverty, security, things like that. And of course, I think green spaces, food growing projects are a really great way to connect climate action and sustainability with people's daily lives. And it really seems like food and green spaces are ways that communities can get really involved on the ground and really do so much work already in Lambeth. And we see our role in the council as really just trying to enable that, facilitate it, coordinate it as much as possible, and not try and kind of overcomplicate or duplicate work that's already being done. Really, really amazing work by sort of community groups like Incredible Edible. So yeah, really keen to just continue that sort of partnership working and do what we can to share data and work together as far as possible. So I'm going to try share a quick, very quick presentation on the Food Poverty Action Plan, if there's still time.
Yep.
Yeah. I can't find a way to share. Matt, do you need to stop sharing first before I can share? There we go. All right, is that working?
Yep.
Right, so the consultation on this draft food poverty and insecurity plan has recently closed. And apparently Vida, my colleague in public health, who's leading on this, has received loads of useful responses to that consultation. So that's great, there's been a lot of interest. And she's brilliant, she's very kind of open to feedback and kind of collaboration. So those are her details there in case you have any particular queries that I can't answer. And I'm also happy to take questions that come up later away and get back to you on those. So just in a nutshell, 3 core elements to the plan, considering prevention, crisis management, immediate provision, and then wider environmental factors. Preventative actions, really just looking at things like, for example, London living wage and how we stop food poverty becoming a problem in the first place. And those kinds of preventative actions don't necessarily only apply to the sort of food system only, but looking at wider financial support, welfare support, things like that, and making sure that schools and other partners who are reaching kind of vulnerable communities are a core part of that strategy. And then crisis management and immediate provision, as we've seen in the COVID crisis, that there's a really critical role that the council, working together with its community partners, can play in making sure that nobody slips through the cracks, and that emergency food provision is healthy, nutritious, is stable, and provides for particular needs and dietary requirements. And then quite exciting bit that I think aligns quite well with the work that we're talking about today, and also with the climate change response work, is the sort of wider environmental factors. How do we work together across the food system, both locally and beyond Lambeth's boundaries, to make sure that that's becoming more resilient over time, and that we're taking actions that reduce food waste, which is a good thing for carbon emissions, and also for kind of closing that loop in terms of nutrient cycle and making sure we're kind of making the best use of all the resources that are available locally. And there's lots of things that we can do as a council, but I think given this really resource constrained environment we're all working in, one of the critical things that we can do is just making sure we're providing that coordinating, data sharing, access to grants kind of function, where we're not necessarily designing, delivering projects on our own, but really working with partners as much as we can. So that's really the sort of key messages. Yeah, really excited to see this project that's being launched tonight, and see how we can help support it.
Thanks, Kate.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Marge,
Yep.
introduce.
Will we move on to Virginia, or has Pam turned up?
No.
Okay, we'll move on to Virginia. Next, we have the wonderful Virginia Namarco, from the creator of Lambeth Larder. She spoke last year at our first food story. This online and hard copy document is an invaluable source of information for people seeking food and financial support, and has been especially vital this past year. Virginia, if you want to start. It'd be lovely to hear from you. And if anybody wants to chat or ask questions, please put it in the chat room at the side. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marjorie. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to Janie, Tori and Marge for inviting me to speak today. Much appreciated. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Lambeth Larder, and then I'll show you the mapping work that we've been doing. So basically, I run Lambeth Larder Community Food Resource, and we're a community social enterprise, and we're based in Lambeth. We're based in 3 Space in Brixton. So we've been active for about 3 years now, and our aim is to reduce food poverty at a local level. So we don't provide food, but we provide information that connects local residents with emergency food and other support like centres, debt and mental health services. So during COVID-19, we've increased our work with community groups. So we've been connecting them to each other and to essential supplies like surplus food. So the aim has been to help to avoid duplication and to increase collaboration. So we see food poverty and food insecurity as symptoms of overall poverty. So we see food aid organisations, food growing sites, advice centres and mental health organisations as part of a wider ecosystem. So the aim is really that we're not just focusing on provision of food, but the kinds of support that people will need in order to get them out of a financial crisis. So we do this by providing free tools and resources, including physical booklets, info sheets for people who are not online. And our online work includes the COVID-19 response map, a website and our social media outputs. So since we started, we've created 2 online community maps. And the most recent is our COVID-19 response map. And it's probably our most comprehensive and ambitious. So we worked with Mapping for Change, the social mapping organisation. Alongside that, it's been very much a community effort. So we've had input from local groups, residents, also Lambeth Council's spatial information team. So there's been a huge increase in the amount of groups providing food aid during the pandemic, but also the amount of organisations that have set up like Lambeth Mutual Aid that didn't exist before the pandemic, but have been highly active across the borough. So the purpose of the map has been to show what organisations are still operating during the crisis and whether their services have changed from face-to-face to online, to telephone delivery only. So again, the changes in service have been really important to document because we haven't been able to, physically go out and visit places in the same way that we were prior to the pandemic. So there are many more organisations than we're able to show on the map, many that we don't know of yet, and some organisations don't necessarily want us to show their organisation on the map to avoid them kind of overstretching the service that they are providing. I'd say that all of our work relies on ongoing relationships with the community. And in terms of what the next steps are for Lambeth Larder and our work, I would say that we want to try and collate the data that we're collecting and share it in a useful way with other stakeholders and partners. So, it's great to have the resource of the map, but I think there's a lot of sort of underlying data that we could probably make better use of. So on that note, I'm going to share the screen and put you out of your misery, and you can actually see the real map. Oh, thank you for sharing. Okay, here we go. So this is a close-up. Let me untoggle and let me zoom out a bit. Let me get myself out of the way. That's better. Okay, so this is an overview of the map. So here we see Lambeth, and one of the things we wanted to do to start off with was to include the town centres in the borough, so that we kind of break down the different areas and what kind of provision was available in which area. And we, as I said before, we've seen this kind of huge growth in food aid providers. So initially we had just like the food banks, the Trestle Trust food bank. So you can see we've broken it down into different categories, because the range of food aid that's available now is much more comprehensive than it was kind of prior to COVID. So we've seen the Trestle Trust food banks, which everyone knows of. But we've also got independent food aid providers, and a huge number of food aid delivery services that set up during COVID, and the food distribution hubs which have grown during that time. I'll zoom in a bit, because these numbers that you can see are just a grouping thing that the map does. So the closer that you go in, the more detail you see. So so you can see that there are these, for example, that there are all these different providers. Like, we zoom in, yeah, so Platform Cafe, for example, and the details about whether or not it's open during COVID, and whether or not they have a delivery service or collection. Other things that we've mapped are things like the social supermarkets. One of the other things that we've been able to do as well during COVID is, let me zoom out again. There we go. Is show things like last summer, there was a project which the Mayor of London ran, the Kitchen Social project. So there were a number of groups which ran holiday food projects. So we've been able to map those as well over the course of the these were open during the summer holidays. So again, they'll be running again this year. So you can see. So alongside the food provision, one of the things that we wanted to do was show some of the more things like infrastructure, I guess you'd call them. So we've put things like all of the, I'll get rid of some things, otherwise it gets a bit busy, so I'll untoggle that. Right, so we wanted to show like all the community halls that were in Lambeth. And the idea here was that we had this notion that the community halls would be available for community groups to be able to use during the holidays, during the pandemic. This hasn't been the case actually, and they've all been closed during the pandemic, or the majority have been closed during the pandemic. But at the time when we mapped this, we saw this as a potential resource for the community. And it may be that, you know, once they've reopened, that we can see that where they are and how we might make contact with them. We've also been able to map the mutual aid. I mentioned the mutual aid network as well. And they've been very effective in terms of setting up borough, or rather across the borough, but ward level groups. So every ward has a mutual aid group that operates, and we've got the contact details for them, and they operate at much more hyper local level than this as well. So they have like neighborhood WhatsApp groups, for example. I think one of the other things that it's enabled us to be able to do is show kind of the provision across the borough, because you can start to see that certain areas have, you know, a lot more going on in them. So like if you're in the Brixton area, you can see there's a lot of activity going on here. Whereas if you live in the Streatham area, there's a lot less provision in those areas. So I'm not sure how I'm doing for time.
You're okay. As
Oh,
long, yeah, you're
okay.
nearly 6:30.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's been really useful. So we can see that certain areas, you know, there's definitely a dearth of provision, and there could be more, and that hopefully that will go towards be helpful in terms of like planning. And also if groups contact us and they're saying, you know, we want to set up a project in our area, if they're based in an area where there's a lot of need, you know, maybe they would consider doing a project in an area where sorry, if the other way around, if they're working in an area where there's a lot of groups already operating, maybe they would consider working in an area where there's more need and fewer groups operating already. So the other thing that we've been able to do is map. I think I've got here all of the food aid, the mental health organisations as well. So we broke those down as well into lots of different areas. So we've got free and low cost counselling, acute and mental health and work, and peer-led organisations. So again, it's the aim of this map is kind of hopefully giving people a kind of toolkit of the things that they might need if they're in a crisis. I think the final thing I wanted to talk about was we had the opportunity to map the housing estates that Lambeth Council manages, and that was really great because they provided some open source files which enabled us to kind of really look at a very sort of hyper local level. Let me just zoom in again. Where the council housing was, and that's been really useful in terms of connecting certain things up. So it's not just knowing where there might be high density of people, but also, so for example here, you can see with this yellow block that I've highlighted here, we know that there's a residents association and a community centre in that area. So in an ideal world, you know, if you were looking for a space to hire, you'd get in contact with that resident association. Or we at Lambeth Larder, we've been working with some of the tenants and residents associations who might have needed surplus food, for example. So, you know, there's ways here to connect with them. So it only gives a snapshot of some of the social housing providers in the borough, because there are obviously the housing associations and other tenant management organisations. But in terms of a kind of baseline of social housing, it's been quite useful for us to be able to map this and to be able to have access to these files. So I think I'm going to stop there. So
That's brilliant.
Thank you, Virginia.
okay.
Right. Thank you. It was a fantastic map. It's the first time I've actually seen it.
Mm.
I mean, somebody's asked in the chat, is it possible to show a tooltip when you hover a cursor over? But will you put the map online? Will you give everybody the address where they can look at your map?
Yeah, I think someone's already shared it. It's oh yes, Celestia. Thank you, Celestia.
Right, great.
Yeah, it's if you go up to 23 minutes past the hour in the chat, there's a link there.
Brilliant.
I can't see what the question is.
It's further down. It's 3 down from there. But anyway, we can catch up on questions at the end. I think we've got to give Joanna and Janie a good 25 minutes to talk about Arup. So Janie, take it away.
Okay, thanks. Virginia, it's so brilliant to have that shown to us in detail, because I've seen it kind of growing and evolving, and it's just so multi-layered. Anyway, really fab to looked at it. And thank you to Kate and Matt for giving us a bit of context. It's very encouraging to hear that the council are really taking these things seriously, and that food growing is in there as something that can make a difference. not only to climate change, but to health and well-being, as we have all absolutely understood this year. So just a bit of a recap for those of you who don't know about Incredible Edible Lambeth. We're a very ambitious organisation in that we would love to, our goals are, one is that every person in Lambeth lives within 100 metres of a place where they could grow food if they wanted to, that every school in Lambeth has food growing, and that every housing estate has an opportunity for residents to grow food. And we've really seen this past year, this explosion of interest in food growing, which is exciting, because some of us here tonight have been banging on about this for years, and others are newcomers, and it's just wonderful when we find that new people are wanting to do this. A little bit of an intro to the next part of this hour. Why have we partnered with Arup, you might be wondering, for this work on mapping all the green spaces in the borough. This is what we're planning to do with Arup. So we started talking with Joanna just about after when the first lockdown started. All the Arup staff were furloughed, and Jo transferred her incredible energy and expertise to her immediate neighbourhood and wondered how she could make a difference to where she lives, which is fortunately for us in Lambeth. And we've never actually met. We feel like we're good friends now, but we've met. How tall are you, Jo? This is something that, yeah, exactly. You see, you don't know this when you've never met someone in real life. We started sort of teasing out the problems of land ownership, abandoned and uncared for sites, access to land, lack of understanding as to who owned what, and whether anyone had the right to grow food on these random pieces of land. So guerrilla gardening is a long established concept, and it's been happening in Lambeth for decades. And I think it's a really important thing to do, because it draws attention to the amount of disused or neglected land that exists in the borough. It's a really good way of highlighting a piece of land that's just been left to, well, uncared for and trodden on, filled with litter. We've all seen it across the borough. We hope that by mapping the whole borough for green space, used or otherwise, we will draw attention to this often very unsightly land, and we will then be enabled to transform it for the benefit of local communities and an increase in food growing. Not us personally, but local communities will then have that highlighted. They will feel enabled to start growing food. And we know, really, I think it's really understood now that food growing holds people and improves lives, and that is something that we care massively about. So I'm going to hand you over to Joanna Farrow from Arup, who's going to do a bit of a slide presentation on what this mapping project is all about. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And yes, I am tiny, if my head never showed you that. So we weren't furloughed. I just have to let everyone know that Arup wasn't furloughed. I was actually getting involved through my volunteering with the Humanitarian Landscape Collective, which I co-founded with some friends. And what we do is we offer our skills as landscape architects to communities. And so we started tapping into mutual aid calls during the first lockdown, just to first hear what the problems were and offer our skills. And that's where I met Janie. And I was just so inspired by her ambition, and we share the same values, and she's a big picture thinker, and she really wants to get down to solving problems, not just superficially, but really from a robust place. so let me share my screen quickly. So maybe I should start with, 1 second. F5. Okay, so we started our journey with Janie about a year ago, and we weren't quite sure what were we proposing. We have these skills, and I have these we have these resources at Arup. So we started transitioning more into my professional space and what resources I could tap into from work. So we applied to a fund called an Invest in Arup, which invests in ideas and projects. So we were lucky enough to get the funding, and henceforth we started this project, which is called Mapping Lambeth's Food Growing Potential. And the aims for this project are to identify all the potential spaces. We do have a lot of data already that we found on existing food spaces, but there could be others out there. So the idea is to map all the potential ones and the existing ones, and this would bring us to a more comprehensive food growing map. Another really key point for our project aims was that we created a project methodology that was really easy to replicate. It's scalable and can be repeated across other boroughs, not just Lambeth. Lambeth is a bit of a test bed, so we are learning and we're adapting and we're changing. But the idea is for this to be open source, and to be adopted with potentially other incredible edible groups. As we know, there's about 150 spread across the UK, so there's a lot of potential for getting this rolled out. When we started the project, we know that COVID presented a lot of issues, especially with verifying sites for potential food growing. So one of the key points that we had was getting volunteers to actually go verify potential sites through the GIS mapping and analysis. And the GIS mapping and analysis was going to be done in-house by Arup. It's a desktop research. You don't have to go out on site. You can do it from your home. And we've got experts in Arup. A lot of my colleagues are helping us with the project at the moment to collate, to analyze and visualize this data, but it had to be open source and freely available. The second point, because we couldn't really engage with volunteers on the ground and get people to participate in that sense, and it also offered limitations to participation, especially at a neighborhood scale. We actually had to rapidly test a new solution, which is crowdsourcing the geospatial data. So we quickly, before I go into the map and what we've developed, geographic information systems is linked to what Matt was showing you earlier on in the presentation. It's mapping, it's data that's freely available, and it's linked to some of the data that we're picking up, and we're obviously looking at it through a lens of food growing and biodiversity. And some of the data that we've picked up is links to population density, low income areas, brown fields and green field sites, and overlaying any environmental data such as soil health and air pollution, for instance. And food deserts is also a really big one. So we as Arup would start looking and analyzing spatially those gaps to access green space and food growing initiatives. So this is the second part of our data collection, which is an online interactive map, which we developed in-house at Arup. The idea is that this is just a research tool, and we're deploying this for the next month until the end of March. And we're hoping people will get involved. I know there's a lot of people on the call that aren't from Lambeth, not working or living here, but maybe there's potential for you to roll out something similar in your areas, in your locations. But hopefully this is inspiring like avid food growers and people who are very interested in equalizing access to food and the inequality that it presents, and especially right now with COVID-19, with things escalating and people needing access to just basic, healthy, affordable food. So the online interactive map is a way of mapping potential food growing spaces that are underperforming. So if you know of a space in your area, we'll send you a link to this app, and it can be opened in any device. It basically works like Google Maps. It just has a slightly different interface. But once you say click to submit your point, then we have a bit of a drop-down menu where you can start to describe the space, and it's already like pre-decided. So you can just click on the spaces and then add a photo. So that's the way we're going to verify the site. Since we can't get volunteers and we have to do everything online. And this becomes a really collaborative, interactive map. So you can actually start seeing everyone else contributing to the map as it's ongoing. So we have categorized a few food growing spaces that could fall into a potential production for food, a food production area. Some of those, the bigger spaces would probably be the more institutional spaces, like churchyards, schools, shopping centers, spaces around like that, and gray spaces, which include impermeable spaces such as paved areas, because we can put planters and planter boxes to start growing food on more hard spaces. And we've categorized about 10 of these spaces. Some of them are car parks, for instance, which are could be very much underutilized, especially with the modal change or the modal shift from people moving more by foot or bicycle or alternative modes of transport. So car parks are probably underperforming in most of our urban areas and could be transformed into something else. So our mapping timeline, although the project itself will probably span to the end of April, the actual crowdsourcing phase will kick off next week. We're hoping to launch the app and also host a virtual workshop where people can drop in if they're struggling with the app, and we'd be available to show them how to, to upload the photos, to navigate around, either a phone app or on the browser. And this will be a 3-week process where we'll be waiting for the data to start showing up, and then by the end of March, we'll end the mapping and start incorporating the finer grain detail into our analysis. So the key outcomes for this project we see as strengthening local food activities, increasing local food resilience, and elevating the importance of food growing in urban spaces and really bringing food closer to the source. The longer term outcomes, and these are big ambitions for ourselves and for Incredible Edible, is to strive to increase food production by 15% in the neighborhood, and to strive to end food poverty in our local borough. We would also like this research to unlock more urban land for food growing, and we would like this work to also increase coordination and facilitation of local food growing initiatives with local residents, businesses, and other charities and local authority. And hopefully this helps inform future development plans that link open space, food production, and enhances local biodiversity. So this is my last slide. And the next steps are for you to sign up today. And Janie will hopefully put a link to the sign up in the chat. And this is mostly for people that are, in our local vicinity who are interested in this project, who want to get involved in the mapping, or are just generally interested in urban food growing. So we'll be getting in touch with you and giving you updates directly. And in the meantime, to start looking for spaces, looking out for underperforming spaces. It could be as small or as big as anything as you care. And then yeah, we would like people to start taking photos so that once the launch of the interactive map next week sometime comes through, then people can join the virtual workshop, and we've got a bit of content to work with. Thanks, and that is everything from me.
Thank
I
you.
think back to Janie now.
Yeah, Jenny, do you want to say anything now?
Yeah, I was just about to add the link. But if you are familiar with the Incredible Edible Lambeth website, there's an article there called Mapping Lambeth's Food Growing Potential. And I think that's, I haven't quite finished putting that in. No, it's fantastic. Thank you, Joe, for that presentation. So as Joe said, the next step is to encourage as many people as possible to sign up and get involved. And we're hoping that it's going to be a really easy process, that you're walking along, you've got your phone, you find yourself somewhere, you take a photo, you click on the various different elements and send it off. And that is the verification we need. But we would really encourage everybody to keep an eye out in their neighbourhood for land that may be potentially food growing in a few years' time. Because if any of you have ever seen these sort of before and after pictures, it's amazing that really you can go from a derelict site to a flourishing food production site in literally 2 years. Even a year, you will get some food coming back. And yeah, this is an ambitious project, and we want to see Lambeth taking the lead. And that's why it's really exciting that we've got amazing partners like Virginia, who is helping us to, hopefully this food will then link into food banks and people who are accessing food that way. And that really just a small amount of fresh food that's being grown on the doorstep will obviously improve the nutritional value of the diets, which is a really, really critical thing. A small amount of freshly grown food that has not traveled hundreds and hundreds of miles is going to make a big impact on the nutrition in our families and everybody in Lambeth. So cool.
And also to mention, Janie, the zero carbon footprint. As we know, the agricultural industry contributes to about 30% or 25% of carbon emissions. So it's it benefits as well in that sense.
It is win-win, and this is where food growing is so cross-cutting. It goes across all different areas of our life, and that's why we're hoping that we'll be taken seriously on this one, which will be good. Right, I'm just looking at the time, 6:52. We've got 8 minutes for questions if anybody has any. I'm going to hand over to you, Marge, to look at, are there any questions in the chat?
No, everybody's been really kind and nice, and everybody wants to get the map, and Virginia's map is looking fantastic. Yeah, no, I think everybody's quite happy. I see we've got 2 councillors with us. We've got Jackie Meldrew and we've got Annie Gallop. I wonder if any of them would want to say anything, because I know you're really interested in it.
Yes. Well,
yes. Hi, Jackie.
I'm a complete food growing fanatic. I've had an allotment for 30 years, so I've been eating my own food most summers. I don't do very much shopping at all, actually. So yeah, I'm very keen on this. I think it's wonderful. It's brilliant, and more people need to do this. It's the trouble with allotments; they're getting more and more expensive now. So they've changed a bit, but of course they're ideal. But you need to have them near home, really. The nearer they are, the easier they are to nurture if you've got some space. And we just don't have enough gardens, do we? We've got more and more flats. Everybody in this borough lives in a flat, you can't put too much out on your balconies because of fire safety. So we need safe places to grow food. And I'm going to be, I think I'm going to be doing a lot more with our housing estates in the coming year.
Okay.
Please get in contact with me. Only me wants to do that. I'm on the.
But could you get your other councillors, because every ward councillor must know where he's got bits of, she has got bits of land that nothing's happening on, you know, so it'd be useful if all our councillors, if you could pass on that information and say, look, we're mapping the whole area.
It's very interesting you raise that, because one of the issues I've been doing in my ward, we've realised there's lots of little pockets of privately owned land, because one of them changed hands, it was bought. And people are really concerned. And one of the things we've been looking at is trying to get some of these plots of land registered as assets of community value. So that might be something else to put into the rich mix, because that means if it's registered as an asset of community value, it goes on to land registry. And if they want to sell that piece of land, the community group is registered, gets first dibs. And these registrations last about 5 years. So it sounds like it fits in quite nicely with the sort of the work you've all been talking about. It's yes,
who's leading on that in the council?
Well, it's a community-led initiative. So we have, the community have to express interest. It's not something for the council to do, it's something for the community to do. But it's there in the legislation, and we've done a few buildings. We actually haven't registered any pieces of land. So I think this whole evening is just opens that up as a great possibility, because you don't own the land, you just express an interest in, that's all. So it's good.
We've got Sheila Bees, who said, who do you expect to be the growers and lead the projects in so many areas across the ward? I mean, that's going to be the difficult thing. If we find the land, who do we get to grow on it?
Who's going to answer that one? Tori.
I think
Tori might have a view.
Well, I was just thinking that it's really for Incredible Edible Lambeth to think about how to bring in the resources to support more people to grow food, so we can help people. And that's kind of information, it's actual resources, it's all sorts of things, linking people who want to grow to local spaces. Because I think our remit really is to help grow the number of people who can do it.
Yeah.
Janie, can I just ask, Marge, sorry, that what happens now in terms of, I mean, I've listened to it and I thought, oh, I could do that, but I'm not quite sure. Are you going to send a simple link to people so that they can sign up easily?
To this map?
Yeah, to this process, so you can just sign up to say we're interested.
Yes,
that everybody's here.
It's a link in the chat.
Yeah.
To the page which gives more information on this project, and then that takes you to a sign up form.
But we could maybe send something afterwards, just very simply to all the people who attended, if we've got their email addresses, have we?
Definitely.
I'm trying to make it easy for myself, to be honest.
Yep.
I don't have to look through anything.
Yeah.
And also, can I ask quickly, I know everybody else needs to ask questions, but how easy is it to say where a space is? How do you do that? Joanna, is it just that you're in that space and you somehow pin it at the time?
Yes. So the way that it works, we've got three different ways of getting you to the location. So you can actually click on your current location and it zooms you right into the place that you're standing in, or you can type it in as like a postcode, or you can actually zoom in into a map and place a pin.
Brilliant.
So there's three different ways of doing it. Yeah.
There's another question. Does the app include any AI to determine still viability? Or is there any link with farmers to help with how to grow education? I think that's two different questions, isn't there?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to answer that one. Joe, would you have a...
Sorry, you cut out there for a second, so I didn't quite hear you.
Oh, sorry.
What you were saying?
At 6:54, Winston has asked a question about AI. Winston, do you want to actually ask that question?
Yes.
If you're still here, do you want to unmute and ask it?
Well, here. So basically, I just want to ask if there was a way to inform or educate the person who took the picture that the soil is viable, not viable. Will that be in some sort of database that people know that they can grow in that spot or they can't grow in that spot?
Yeah, so we're trying to source as much data online, open source as we can. Soil health would be one that we would really be interested in adding to our set. But if we aren't able to get that, then we'd have to probably have more localized, testing, more expert people to go look and see if it's viable. Because I mean, just because the soil isn't healthy doesn't mean that the food growing there isn't potential for the food growing. It just might need that it might just mean that it needs to be remediated, or maybe there's a different option.
Yeah,
to food growing.
Then have to use raised beds, don't you, if you can't use the
raised beds? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Tool has asked a question about the timeline for this, Joe. Would you like to just explain the timeline a little bit? As she's saying, does this
yeah,
so March? Yeah.
Yes, so it's till the end of March. So we'll be launching the interactive map, the link next week, once we've tweaked or fine-tuned the design and made sure that the experience is accessible and everything's worked out. So that's why we're asking people to sign up, so that we can let you know when that's available, so that we can hit the ground running. So it's quite an intensive 3 weeks that we want to do the crowdsourcing mapping until the end of March. So that gives us time to embed the finer grain crowdsourced data into our GIS to help us inform a strategy. So I hope that answers your question.
I think there'll be a question which we've raised is, can we extend this? Can we extend this timeline at all?
Yes. So in terms of our work internally, we're looking for to just draw a line in the sand. It's a really intensive program for us at Arup, but we're looking to keep collecting that data right through to the end of the project, which will be end of April. So people can still access it and still contribute to it. And yeah, but we're looking to start analyzing that data by the end of this month.
Okay.
So that we can just start drawing conclusions.
Yeah. There are lots of questions coming in, but I think we possibly should stop, because I'm very keen that this is never over an hour. What do you think, Marge?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's some great questions. I love the one about allotments, making them a bit smaller so more people could have them. But yeah, there's all great questions. I mean, we're going to record this and take all the questions away, and we can answer a lot of these. So yeah, I think it's been a good evening.
Thank you. It's Annie Gallop here, Councillor Gallop. Sorry, I did get mentioned, but I didn't get a chance to respond. And I don't want to hold anyone up any longer, but just to say this looks really exciting. I mean, anyone who knows my history will know that I started a food farm a good few years ago on my council estate where I live. And this is like everything coming together. Our vision that Marjorie, Tori and myself and a lot of others of us have had for a long time. So really good. And I like to think that now the council is going, Lambeth Council is going to be treating council estate green space like park green space. The opportunities are going to be very exciting from now on. So I'm happy to, I've got loads of spaces I can think of. Obviously very supportive. I won't hold you up, but thank you and well done, everybody.
Get out there, everybody, and take pictures.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining and giving up your time to be with us. Okay, see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.